My name is Loretta Kimball, 25 years old. It's being saved for your future. My father said that to me for 10 years, every time I asked about the money I'd earned since I was 15. My brother Colton never had to ask about his money. His checks stayed in his pocket, and no one ever called that selfish. When I finally opened the account that was supposed to hold my future came to zero. It had been closed for years. I didn't scream in that bank lobby. I signed the request for records, thanked the woman at the desk, and walked out into a cold October afternoon with my hands perfectly still. They didn't know I had quietly built a real future somewhere they'd never thought to look. And the moment they found out, the moment my father stood at the head of the Thanksgiving table and told everyone I'd made something of myself thanks to this family, the person begging for help wasn't me. To understand why an empty account didn't break me, you have to go back to a kitchen with two sets of rules, one for Colton and one for me. I grew up in a narrow gray house on Peabody Street, the kind of house where you learned early who mattered and who was expected to make things easier for the ones who did. My father was an electrician who believed the world was simple. Men provided, women adjusted, and the family was a single account that only he could balance. My mother, Ramona, agreed with whatever kept the house quiet, and my brother Colton, 2 years older than me, was the sun everything else orbited. I don't say that to sound bitter. I say it because it was measurable. When Colton turned 16, my father co-signed a loan for a used Camaro and spent 3 weekends helping him rebuild the transmission in our garage, both of them laughing under the hood while I did dishes at the window and watched. When I turned 16, my father drove me to the bus stop and told me the bus built character. The measuring showed up in the smallest places, which is where it does the most damage. On Colton's 12th birthday, there was a cake from the Good Bakery, his name written in gel frosting. On mine, my mother served a cracked box mix while my father stayed in the living room because there was a game on. I learned not to want the bakery cake. That's the part nobody warns you about. How a child will quietly rearrange her own wants to fit the size of the space she's allowed, until she genuinely believes she never wanted the frosting at all. In 2014, when I was 15, I got my first job bagging groceries at a store called Halloran's Market on Route 9. I remember the exact weight of my first paycheck in my hand, $192, earned over 2 weeks of standing until my feet went numb. I remember the green apron with my name stitched crooked on the chest. I brought that check home like it was a trophy. My father held it up to the light, nodded once, and told me to sign it over. "Your money is the family's money," he said. "That's how a family works in this house." He put his hand out, palm up, and waited. I asked carefully whether Colton's paychecks from the auto shop went into the family too. My father looked at me like I'd said something ungrateful. "Your brother's situation is different," he said. He didn't explain how. He never did. So I signed it over, and the next one, and the one after that. From 2014 to 2017, every 2 weeks, I endorsed my checks on the back and handed them to a man who told me they were being kept safe. He'd write the amount in a small kitchen ledger, not a bank statement I could see, close the drawer, and that was the ceremony. "For your future," he'd say. "You'll thank me one day." I was 15. I didn't know how accounts worked yet. I believed him. That's the part that still catches in my throat. Not that he lied, but that I was young enough to fill in his silence with love. By the time I was 18, I'd handed over somewhere close to $11,000. I know that number because, apart from his kitchen ledger, I'd started keeping my own quiet count in the back of a school notebook. Not because I distrusted him yet, but because I liked watching it grow. $11,000. To an 18-year-old from Peabody Street, that was a foundation. That was community college, or a car that started in winter, or a deposit on a life. The week I graduated high school, I asked my father when I could use it. I wasn't demanding. I had a plan. I wanted to take a real estate licensing course because a woman at church had once told me the only people in our town who ever climbed out were the ones who understood property. My father set down his coffee and told me the money wasn't liquid right now. That was the word he used. Liquid. An adult word. Polished and heavy. The kind of word that could make a locked door sound responsible. It's tied up, he said, but it's yours. It's safe. When you're really ready, it'll be there. Colton, at 20, was standing in the doorway eating cereal. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me for a second too long, then looked away. I didn't understand that look until years later. When I finally did, it rearranged everything. I left home at 18 with 2 duffel bags and the ledger number in my head, not a dollar of it in my hand. $11,000, waiting for when I was really ready. I told myself I'd earn my own way until then, and let the account grow. And one day I'd walk into that bank and start my life on the foundation I'd built one crooked-aproned paycheck at a time. I want to tell you, the next years were a clean climb. They weren't. They were the valley. I rented a room above a laundromat in a town 2 hours north where nobody knew my family, and I could be no one for a while. The room cost $400 a month and smelled like dryer sheets and mildew, and the radiator only worked if you hit it. I waited tables at the Copper Kettle from 5 until lunch, then cleaned offices in the evenings. On the bus between the 2 jobs, I studied for the real estate exam out of a used textbook with someone else's highlighting in it. I failed the exam the first time. I sat in a testing center that smelled like carpet cleaner, missed by 4 questions, and cried in the parking lot for exactly 10 minutes before I got back on the bus and went to clean offices. I could barely afford to fail it twice. The retake fee was money I didn't have. So for 6 weeks, I studied on my breaks, flashcards rubber-banded to my order pad, until the vocabulary of deeds and easements and fiduciary duty lived in my mouth like a second language. I passed the second time. And passing a licensing exam, it turns out, is the easy part. Nobody hands a 20-year-old waitress a career. A license is just permission to starve in a nicer outfit. There was one February I still measure other hard times against. The diner cut my shifts because business was slow, and the office cleaning contract went to a cheaper company overnight, and I had $110 and rent due in 9 days. I remember sitting on the floor of that room above the laundromat with the radiator dead and my coat on, doing the arithmetic over and over as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into a different answer if I was patient enough. They didn't. I sold the only thing I owned worth anything, a gold chain my grandmother had left me, to a pawn shop on Route 9 for $80, made rent, and told no one. I never called home. Not once. That whole February. I'd rather have starved in that cold room than hand my father one more reason to say I couldn't make it on my own. Some kinds of pride are just unfinished self-respect. Mine kept me moving, so I've made my peace with it. That's where Fran Whitfield comes in. Fran ran a 2-desk brokerage out of a converted bungalow on the edge of town, the kind of small operation the big franchises had written off. She was 61, widowed, sharp in a way that made people sit straighter, and she wore reading glasses on a beaded chain that she never actually used to read. I walked into her office with a resume that was mostly diner shifts and asked if she needed an assistant. She looked at me over those glasses for a long moment. "You know what most people your age want?" she said. "They want the closing, the champagne, the sign in the yard." She leaned back. "Do you know what the job actually is?" I said, "Reading the paperwork nobody else wants to read." She hired me on the spot. She told me later it was because I'd said reading and not selling. Fran believed that anybody could learn to sell, but almost nobody could bear to sit with a document until it told the truth. That skill, the patience to follow a paper trail to the end, she taught me over 2 years at 40 hours a week. And later, it would save me in the one room where my family thought paper couldn't speak. For the first year, I made almost nothing. I ran open houses in the rain. I drove strangers to see homes they couldn't afford and homes they'd never love. And I learned to tell the difference before they did. I specialized slowly in the buyers nobody else made time for. The first-timers, the young families, the nurses and mechanics, and grocery clerks with decent credit and no cushion. The people the flashy agents ignored because the commissions were small. My people, in other words. People who'd been told the bus built character. The first clients who ever really believed in me were the Brennans, a young couple, a line cook, and a home health aide, who'd been turned away by 2 other agents because their budget was small and their questions were many. I spent 4 months with them. I found them a tired little 2-bedroom with a good roof and a bad kitchen, walked them through every line of the paperwork out loud because no one had ever done that for them, and caught a junk fee the lender had buried that would have cost them $900 they didn't have. The day they closed, Mrs. Brennan hugged me in the parking lot and cried into my shoulder and said, "You're the first person in this whole thing who acted like we were real." That sentence did something to me. It named the exact hunger I'd carried my whole life and turned it into a job. The Brennans sent me every young couple they knew for the next 3 years. My whole early business grew out of one family deciding I was worth telling their friends about. You remember that when you've spent your childhood being the one nobody bragged about? Progress came, but it came the way it actually comes. 1 step forward, half a step into a hole. My first full year with a license, I closed 11 homes and cleared a little under $30,000, less than I'd made working service jobs. And I told myself that was the tuition. My second year, I doubled it. Then I lost a deal I'd worked for 5 months when a buyer's financing collapsed 2 days before closing. And I sat in my car outside the title company and shook because that commission had been most of my next 2 months' rent. Fran found me there. She didn't comfort me. She handed me a stack of 3 cold call lists and said, "The only cure for a dead deal is the next one. Read the paper, make the calls." I made the calls. That's the whole secret, if there is one. When it falls apart, you read the next document and make the next call, and you do it with a steady hand even when your hands want to shake. My family stayed in my life the way weather stays in your life, occasional and mostly cold. My mother called on birthdays and talked about Colton. Colton had gotten married, then not. Colton had started a contracting business. Colton had bought a truck. My father never called at all unless something was broken, and he thought I might know a guy. Nobody asked what I was doing. When I mentioned once that I'd sold my first house on my own, my mother said, "That's nice, honey," and then told me Colton was thinking about flipping homes and wasn't that exciting since he was so good with his hands. I didn't argue. I'd learned by then that arguing with my family was like arguing with the weather. You just got wet. But I remembered every, "That's nice, honey." I remembered the account, still waiting, still growing, I assumed, in some safe place my father had chosen. I told myself that when I was ready, really ready, the way he'd always said, I'd claim it, and it would be the proof that I'd been building something the whole time, even when no one was watching. By 23, I'd saved enough and closed enough deals that Fran did something that changed my life. She offered to let me buy into the brokerage as her partner. Not out of charity, she was ready to slow down, and she'd watched me turn her forgotten little bungalow operation into something with a waiting list of first-time buyers. I took a loan I was terrified of, signed papers with a hand that shook, and became Fran's partner in what we renamed, together over cheap wine at her kitchen table. We called it Hearthstone Realty, because a hearthstone is the piece a house is built around, the one that holds the heat, and because it was the opposite of everything I'd been taught to expect for myself. The day they installed the sign in the window of our office downtown, I stood on the sidewalk in the cold and watched a man on a ladder screw our company's name into place, my name behind it as half-owner, and I thought about a green apron with my name stitched crooked over the heart. Same name, different story. I didn't call my parents to tell them. I'd stopped expecting that particular door to open. But I took a photo of that sign, and I kept it, the way you keep evidence. I didn't know yet that the photo would become evidence at a dinner table later. By 24, Hearthstone had 6 agents and a real office downtown with our name in the window. I'd developed a small, specific engine that actually worked. I'd find distressed starter homes, the ugly, tired ones the flippers passed over because the profit was thin, put modest, honest work into them, and either resell them affordably or match them to the first-time buyers on my list. Small margins, high volume, clean reputation. I wasn't getting rich the way the title makes you picture, but I was building something with a foundation, brick by boring brick, exactly the way I'd handed over those paychecks. Then came the deal that changed the scale of everything. A widowed school bus driver named Sylvia had been talked into a refinance by a slick outfit that would have stripped $40,000 of equity out of the only thing she owned and left her worse off in every way. She came to me because the Brennans had told her to. I spent a weekend reading her loan documents line by line, the patience Fran drilled into me, finally paying its full dividend. And I found the trap, and I helped her out of it and into a clean refinance that saved her home. I didn't make much on it. I did it because it was right, and because a version of me at 15 had once trusted a man who held out his palm and said, "Trust me." A local reporter heard about it and wrote a piece. Young broker, small brokerage, the agent who reads the fine print for the people nobody reads it for. My name in the paper. My face. The story got shared around town more than any newspaper story has a right to, and the phone at Hearthstone did not stop ringing for a week. But here's the part that mattered, the part that made it a business and not just a nice moment. Those calls were the exact clients I was built for. Cautious, first-time, working people who'd read that a broker existed who wouldn't fleece them. My close rate on them was high because I actually was that person. One honest deal, told truthfully in a newspaper, turned into 30 referrals, which turned into a waiting list. By the fall of 2024, at 25, I was closing more volume than agents twice my age. And for the first time in my life, I had something my father would have to see as success. I want to be clear about the money, because the money is the point, and also isn't. In 2024, my share of Hearthstone would clear a little over $200,000. I owned half a company. I'd just put money down on a small house of my own, the first place that had ever been mine from the day I signed for it, with a real fireplace and a hearthstone I'd picked out myself. And I still hadn't touched the account, the $11,000 my father had kept safe for a decade. In my head, it had become almost sacred, the seed money, the thing I'd claim when I was really ready. And that October, buying my own house, refinancing my own life, I finally felt ready. So I called my father to ask how to access it. That question started everything, and it was also the best thing I ever did. He didn't answer. My mother did. And before I could even ask my question, she started crying. Colton's contracting business had collapsed. He'd overextended on a flip, bought 3 houses at once with borrowed money, blown the budgets, missed the market. He owed subcontractors. He owed the bank. There was a tax problem on top of it, the kind that comes with letters and deadlines. My mother's voice shook as she laid it out, and underneath the fear I heard the old melody, the one I'd known my whole life. Colton needed help. Colton needed saving. Colton's situation was different. Then she said the thing that stopped my breath. Your father says you're doing so well now. He says you have that account he set aside for you, and you're a big success, and family helps family. A pause. He wants to talk to you at Thanksgiving about helping your brother. Set aside for you. That account. Present tense. Still there. I told her I'd think about it, and I hung up, and I sat in my new kitchen with my hand flat on my own hearthstone, cold from the October air. Because for the first time in 10 years, I was going to go find out exactly what my father had been keeping safe for me. The next morning, I drove to the branch where I'd handed over my first endorsed check at 15. I'd never once been inside as an adult with authority. I was a licensed broker now, a business owner, a person who read documents until they told the truth. I asked to see the account opened for me in 2014, when I was 15, with my father listed as the adult custodian. The woman at the desk typed for a while. Her face did the thing customer service faces do when the news is bad and they're deciding how to say it. The account, she told me gently, had been closed in 2019, 5 years ago. The balance at closing had been zero. Zero, I repeated. Zero, she said. There were repeated withdrawals over several years, and then a final closure in 2019. I heard the words the way you hear a car alarm 3 streets over, clearly, and from very far away. I didn't cry. I asked for certified copies of every statement, every withdrawal record, every signature card and closure document the bank was legally required to give the account holder. It took 40 minutes and a small fee. I signed the request with a hand that did not shake because Fran had trained the shake out of me years ago. You do not shake in front of the document. You read it. I read it that night at my own kitchen table, and what I found rearranged my entire childhood. The signatures on the withdrawals weren't my father's. That's what I need you to understand. My whole drive home, I'd been building the story where Glenn Kimball, my father, had quietly spent his daughter's money on the family. Cruel, but almost ordinary, the kind of thing you could grieve and move past. That's not what the papers said. The withdrawal slips were signed by Colton. Not once. 41 times across 4 years, my brother's signature appeared, that same lazy loop on the C he'd used since high school, pulling my money out $200 and $300 at a time. $100 here for the Camaro's insurance, more for the down payment on his truck, a cluster of them the year he started the contracting business. My paychecks, the ones I'd stood on numb feet to earn, the ones I'd handed over believing in a future, had funded my brother's life, dollar by dollar, while everyone told me my money was safe. And here is the detail that took the floor out from under me. On the signature card, the account had my name as the minor it was opened for, my father's name as custodian, and then a third authorized signer added later, Colton. Added in 2015, a year after it opened, when I was 16 and he was 18. No one had ever told me. No one had ever asked me. And nothing in the file showed my consent. My father had taken the account that was supposed to protect a child's earnings and turned it into a side door for his son. He didn't just let it happen. He built the door and handed my brother the key. I sat with that for a long time, and while I sat, my whole childhood resorted itself in front of me like a deck being reshuffled by a stranger's hands. Colton in the doorway, eating cereal, unable to look at me the day I asked about the money. He'd known. He'd known for years. The Camaro insurance, the down payment on the truck, the seed money for the business that would eventually collapse. Piece by piece, my paychecks had been folded into his life. Every time my mother had said Colton needed more, every time my father had said it's different for your brother, I'd heard it as favoritism, as love distributed unfairly. It was worse than that. It wasn't that they loved him more and me less. It's that they had built a quiet machine where my labor became his comfort, and then they'd trained me to feel grateful for the privilege of feeding it. The cruelest part of a well-run theft is that the person being robbed spends years defending the thief. I'd told co-workers my dad was old-fashioned about money. I'd made him sound charming. I didn't feel like crying exactly. I felt like a house feels, I imagine, the moment an inspector finally names the crack that was always in the foundation. Not more broken than before, just finally, permanently seen. Then I did what Fran taught me. I kept reading. The bank records came with copies of the correspondence on file, and there, stapled to the 2019 closure paperwork, was a note in my father's handwriting authorizing the final withdrawal and closure on behalf of both account holders. Beneath it was a phone log the bank had documented, and a line I would read 100 times. Per the custodian's instruction, Loretta Kimball was not to be contacted about the closure. In plain English, it said, "Don't tell Loretta." That was the whole architecture of my childhood in those 3 words. 2 sets of rules, a door with my brother's key in it, and a father standing in front of it his whole life saying, "It's safe, it's yours, you will thank me one day," while behind his back the room emptied out. I didn't call anyone. I didn't send an angry text. I want you to notice that, because it's the difference between the woman my family thought I was and the one I'd quietly become. The old Loretta would have called her mother crying. The new one made a folder. I made copies of everything. I organized it by date. And then I did the one thing I'd trained 10 years to do, and I looked at the paper until it told me not just what had happened, but what I was going to do about it. The first thing I did was call a lawyer. Her name was Meredith Cole, and Fran had used her for the brokerage's contracts for years. I sat in her office with my folder and laid it out flat, and she read it the way I read documents, slowly, without reacting, until she reached the "Don't tell Loretta" note and set down her pen. "I want to manage your expectations," she said, "on recovering the money. Realistically, there are limitation issues, cost issues, and the problem of proving old withdrawals inside a family account. You could try. It would be expensive, it would be ugly, and the odds wouldn't be clean." She let that sit. "That's the bad news." "And the good news?" "The good news," Meredith said, "is that you don't need the money. You already replaced it yourself 10 times over. So the real question isn't what you can get back. It's what you actually want." That question followed me home, and it turned out to be the real fork in the road, sharper than the discovery itself, because I could see both futures clearly. In one, I did what I'd been trained to do my whole life. I helped. I wrote a check, I bailed out Colton, I swallowed the truth to keep the peace, and I let my father tell the table what a good daughter I was, and I bought myself the family's approval at the price of my own dignity one more time, the way I'd been buying it since I was 15. That future was warm and familiar, and it smelled like a box mix cake with a crack down the middle. In the other future, I protected what I'd built. I said no, and I let them call me selfish, because that's what they'd call it. I already knew. The word they always reached for when the capable one finally stopped being convenient. Cold, they'd say. Ungrateful. After everything this family did for you. The trap was that both futures asked me to accept their version of the story. Either I was the good daughter who saved the family, or the cold one who abandoned it. There was no square on their board for the truth that there was nothing to save because they'd already spent me. So I decided I wasn't going to play on their board at all. What did I want? I didn't want $11,000. I'd cleared that in commissions in a good month. I didn't want to sue my parents into the ground. I didn't even want exactly to hurt them. I wanted them to see me, just once, without the story they'd told themselves. I wanted my father to stand in a room where the truth was on the table and be unable to say it's different for your brother. I wanted the thing they'd trained me to accept as normal to be named out loud, in front of everyone, where he couldn't close the drawer on it. And they were handing me the room to do it in. Thanksgiving. My father wanted to talk about helping Colton. He wanted, in front of the whole family, to ask the daughter he'd quietly emptied to bail out the son he'd quietly funded. I told Meredith I wanted to be ready for that conversation. She helped me understand exactly what I owned, what I owed, and what I was, and wasn't, obligated to do for a brother who'd signed his name to my future 41 times. The answer to that last part was nothing. Legally and financially, I owed Colton's debts nothing. Meredith put that in writing so I'd believe it. Then my father called. First time in over a year? His voice was warm in the way it got when he wanted something. The voice from under the Camaro's hood that I'd spent my childhood standing outside of. Your mother says she talked to you, he said, about your brother. A pause I recognized. Look, Loretta, you've done well. Nobody's saying you didn't. But your brother's drowning, and family doesn't let family drown. We were thinking, with what you've got and that account we set up for you back when, you could... We'll talk at Thanksgiving, I said. I heard him smile. He thought he'd won. He thought the quiet girl who'd signed everything over was still standing at the bus stop. Good, he said. That's my girl. We'll figure it out as a family. There it was, the deadline. Thanksgiving Day, Thursday, November 28th, 2024, at the Gray House on Peabody Street, in front of everyone. Aunts, cousins, the whole audience my father liked to perform for. He'd set the stage to pressure me into rescuing Colton, and he'd invited witnesses to make sure I couldn't say no gracefully. He didn't know he'd just booked the room for the wrong show. I spent the next 2 weeks getting ready, and I did it the way I did everything now, quietly, thoroughly, on paper. I had the certified bank records, the withdrawal slips with Colton's signature, the signature card showing when he was added as an authorized signer, the closure note in my father's hand, and the line about not contacting me. I scanned all of it, clean and readable, and arranged it in order so that anyone looking at a screen would understand the story in the sequence it actually happened. Then I added the other file, my file, because I realized, sitting there, that showing them only the theft would let them make it about money, about a mistake, about being sorry, about how it all worked out anyway. I didn't want the conversation to be about what they took. I wanted it to be about what I built while they were taking it and what they never once bothered to see. So I gathered the second set of pictures, the first house I ever sold on my own. The Hearthstone sign going up in the window downtown, the newspaper story about the school bus driver, the closing papers for my house with the fireplace, my tax summary for 2024 with a number on it my father had never dreamed I'd earn, the theft, and then the receipts of everything I'd become without them. That was the deck. Nobody knew I was holding it. The 2 weeks before Thanksgiving had a strange, still quality to them, like the air before weather. I worked my normal deals during the day, showed a couple their first home on a Tuesday, watched them light up in an empty kitchen, and thought about how I'd once lit up over a $192 check. In the evenings, I built the folder. I drove back to the bank twice to make sure the certified copies were exactly what I thought they were, because a document you're going to stake something on is a document you read 3 times, not once. I confirmed with Meredith in writing that I had no legal obligation to Colton's debts and no exposure by refusing. I practiced nothing, no speech, no zinger. I'd learned that the truth doesn't need a performance. It needs to be legible and in order and shown to the right people in the right sequence. That was the whole plan. Not a bomb. The record. The night before, I laid everything out on my kitchen table one last time and looked at it the way Fran taught me to look at a contract. Not for how it made me feel, but for whether it said what I needed it to say. It did. The theft in Colton's hand. The key my father cut. The line that told them not to tell me. And then the receipts of the life I'd built anyway. I closed the laptop and sat in the quiet, and I was calm in a way that surprised me. The calm of a person who has finally stopped waiting to be chosen. I called Fran that night. I told her all of it, the account, Colton's signature, the note. She was quiet for a while. "You know you don't have to do this," she finally said. "You could just not go. You could keep your peace." "I know. But you're going." "I'm going," I said. "Not to burn it down. To put it on the table where he can't close the drawer on it." Fran laughed, low and proud. "Then go read them the document, kid." I hung up and sat by my own fireplace, on the hearthstone I'd chosen, and I thought about a $192 check and a crooked green apron and a man holding out his palm. I wasn't angry, exactly. Anger had burned off years ago. What was left was clear and cold and steady, like the November air on the stone under my hand. I laid out my clothes, charged my laptop, and slept better than I had in weeks. Thanksgiving morning, the gray house on Peabody Street looked smaller than I remembered. They always do. I parked behind my cousin's car and sat for a moment with the laptop bag on the seat beside me, and then I went in. Everyone was there. My Aunt Bev and Uncle Ray in the good chairs, 2 cousins and their kids. My mother, orbiting the kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder, her smile too quick when she saw me, her eyes going straight to whether I'd come alone, whether I'd come soft. Colton on the couch, thinner than I remembered, a beer sweating in his hand, not quite meeting my eyes, and my father at the center of it, holding court near the head of the table, one hand resting on the carving set like a man who liked to feel the handle before the room was his. "There she is," my father announced to the room. "Our success story." The word landed strangely, the way a compliment does when you know it's a setup. Everyone smiled at me. My mother squeezed my arm too hard. We sat down to eat. My father said grace, which he did about once a year, and thanked God for family and for second chances, and I felt Colton flinch beside me at the word chances. The food went around, and my father, who had never in 25 years asked me a single question about my work he actually wanted answered, began to build his stage. He told the table I'd done real well for myself. He told them, chuckling, that he'd always known I had a good head for money. We started her early, didn't we? Teaching her the value of $1. My aunt said how wonderful. He said a family that pulls together, stays together. He said times were hard for some of us, and it was a blessing when the ones who could helped the ones who couldn't. Then he set down his fork, and he put his hand on Colton's shoulder, and he looked at me down the length of the table, and he said the thing he'd invited everyone to witness. "Loretta, I'll just say it plain since we're all family. Your brother's going through it, and everything you've built, and we're proud, we are, you didn't do it alone. This family gave you your start, that account we saved for you, the values we taught you. So I think it's time this family took care of its own again. I think it's time you helped your brother the way we helped you." The table went warm and approving. My mother nodded. My aunt said, "That's beautiful, Glenn." Colton stared at his plate, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage. Calm. The deep, level calm of a person who has read the document all the way to the end and knows exactly what it says. "You're right," I said. My voice was quiet, and the table leaned in to hear it. This family did give me my start. Let me show everyone how. I reached down, took the laptop out of the bag, opened it, and turned it around to face my father. The first photo was a bank withdrawal slip, dated 2016, $200, and at the bottom, in that lazy loop on the C that everyone at that table would recognize, my brother's signature. My father froze. The carving knife was still in his hand, and it stopped moving, and his face, I will remember his face for the rest of my life, did something I'd never seen it do. It went uncertain. "What is that?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was a man feeling the floor tilt. "That's my paycheck," I said, "from when I was 16, withdrawn by Colton." I reached over and tapped the arrow. The next photo, another slip, another signature. "That's another one, and another." Tap, tap. 41 of them across 4 years. The paychecks I earned and handed to you, Dad, because you told me they were being saved for my future. The room had gone very quiet. My aunt's fork was suspended over her plate. My mother had both hands pressed to her mouth. "Loretta," my father started, there's an explanation." "There is," I agreed. I tapped again. The signature card came up on the screen, enlarged so everyone could see. "This is the signature card," I said. "The account had my name as the minor it was opened for, your name as custodian, and then a third authorized signer added later. Colton, added in 2015 when I was 16 and he was 18. I let it sit. "Who would have had to authorize that, Dad? As the custodian?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Uncle Ray had already looked at him and looked away. "And this," I said, and tapped one more time, "is the note that closed the account in 2019. That's your handwriting. And this line here?" I turned the laptop a few degrees so the light caught it. "This is the bank's record that when the account was closed, the custodian instructed them not to contact me." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Don't tell Loretta. That's what it says. That's what all of it says." Nobody spoke. Colton had put his face in his hands. My mother was crying without sound, and my father sat there with the carving knife going loose in his fingers, in front of every person whose good opinion he'd spent his life performing for, with the truth open on a screen where he could not reach in and close the drawer. "You took my money," I said, "and gave it to him, and told me it was mine for 10 years. And today you invited everyone here to watch you ask me to do it again." "It wasn't like," my father tried. "It was exactly like that." I said it gently, which was worse. Across the table, Colton had gone gray. "Dad," he said very quietly, not to me, to our father, "you told me she signed off on it. You told me she knew." Then he looked at me, and the shame on his face told me he had known enough not to ask too many questions. And in that one sentence I understood the last piece of it, that my father had lied to my brother too, had told Colton I'd agreed, so that even the theft would feel to Colton like something the family had decided together instead of something done to me in the dark. My father hadn't just robbed one child. He'd made the two of us into a story where nobody was allowed to see the whole thing at once. That was the machine. That was how it ran for 10 years. "You've never once asked me a real question about my life," I said. "So let me answer the one you built this whole dinner to avoid." I clicked to the second file. The Hearthstone sign in the window, the photo I'd taken from the sidewalk, the newspaper story, the closing papers for my house, and the last image, the number, the real one, the $200,000 I'd earned that year, clean, mine, built from nothing. You said I didn't do it alone, I said. You're right, I did it with a used textbook on a bus, and a woman named Fran who read paperwork with me until I understood it, and about 4,000 hours nobody in this room ever asked about. That's who gave me my start, not this family. I closed the laptop slowly. This family gave me a lesson. It just wasn't the one you meant to teach. My Aunt Bev set down her fork. Into the silence, quiet as anything, she said, "Glenn, is it true?" My father looked around the table for the story that always saved him. "It's different for your brother. Family helps family. You'll thank me one day." And for the first time in his life, in front of all of them, it wasn't there. There was only the document, and the document didn't care how carefully he'd arranged the room. "You have to understand," he finally said, and his voice had gone small. "Your brother was going to lose everything. So you let me lose everything instead," I said, quietly, because I was the one who wouldn't make a scene. I stood up and picked up my bag. "You were right about that for 10 years. You're not right anymore." I didn't slam anything. I didn't cry in front of them. I said thank you to my aunt for asking the honest question, and I walked out of the gray house on Peabody Street into the cold, and I got in my car, and only then did I let out a breath that felt like it had been held since I was 15. It wasn't over. There was one more room to sit in. My mother came out to my car before I could pull away. She stood at the window with her cardigan pulled tight against the cold, and I rolled the glass down because she was still my mother, and because some part of me, the 15-year-old with the crooked apron, needed to hear what she'd say. "I didn't know it was that much," she said. "I swear to you, Loretta, I didn't know about the closure note. I didn't know he told the bank not to." Her voice broke. "I thought it was just a little, here and there, for your brother." "You knew it was some," I said. She couldn't answer that. That was the answer. "He was drowning," she said. The same word my father used, the family's favorite word for the son they'd never let learn to swim. "Colton was always the one who needed more. You were always fine, Loretta. You never needed us the way he did, and I let that become my excuse." And there it was, the whole thing, said plainly at last, by the person who loved me as much as she was able. I was punished for being capable. My competence had been read as consent. Because I didn't fall apart, they decided I could be emptied. "I wasn't fine, Mom," I said. "I was quiet. You taught me those were the same thing." I looked at her, and I felt the anger drain out and leave something heavier and sadder in its place. That's not one mistake. A mistake is once. This was a decision you all made about me, over and over, for 10 years. 41 times on the withdrawal slips and 10 years around them. You don't get to call that a mistake. She started to cry harder, and old Loretta would have gotten out of the car and held her. New Loretta kept her hands on the wheel. "I'm not going to help pay Colton's debts," I said. "Not because I can't, because you finally taught me what my money is for, and it isn't this." I let the silence sit, the way I'd learned to. If you ever want to know me, the actual me, not the success story Dad likes to carve up at dinner, you know where to find me. But it can't be like this. It can't ever be like this again. My mother nodded, tears running, and put her hand flat on the car door the way she used to when I was small, and I put the car in drive as gently as I could, and I left. Colton texted me that night. Just 3 words. "I'm sorry, Lor." I looked at it for a long time. I thought about the boy in the doorway eating cereal who couldn't look at me. The boy who'd known for years and stood inside a family that had made his silence easy. I didn't hate him. I understood him. He'd been handed my life in small denominations his whole existence and told it was his birthright, and no one who loves you the wrong way ever teaches you to say no to a gift. I wrote back, I believe you're sorry. And then, because a boundary isn't cruelty, I added, I hope you climb out. I mean that. But you climb out on your own money now. I didn't hear from any of them for a long time after that, and I was, to my own surprise, all right. The winter after Thanksgiving was the best of my life, and not because of a single dramatic thing. It was better in the boring, structural way that lasts. Hearthstone grew to 9 agents. Fran officially retired in the spring of 2025 and cried at her own party and told the whole room that hiring the waitress who said reading had been the smartest thing she ever did. I hired 2 young agents nobody else would take a chance on. A single mother, a kid straight out of the service, because I knew exactly what it was worth to have one person read your resume and see a foundation instead of a gap. I started something too, quietly, that mattered more to me than the commissions. A small workshop, free, 1 Saturday a month at the Hearthstone office, 4 teenagers with their first jobs. I taught them what a paycheck means, what an account protects, whose name goes on it, and why you read the paper until it tells you the truth. The first Saturday, a girl of about 15 sat in the front row in a fast food uniform, and when I told her that her money was hers, that it did not belong to a family or a father or a promise, that it belonged to the person who stood on numb feet to earn it, she looked at me like I'd handed her something. I had to turn around and pretend to fix the projector for a second. You understand why? I started therapy in January on a Tuesday in an office with a plant I was sure I'd kill. I learned words for things I'd only ever had numbers for. I learned that being the capable one is not the same as being the loved one, and that I'd spent 25 years trying to earn my way into a room where the door had my brother's key in it. I learned that a boundary is not a wall you build out of anger. It's a line you draw out of self-respect, and you can draw it with a steady hand. My mother did write, eventually, a letter, actual paper, in the spring. She said she was staying with Aunt Bev and had left my father for now. That reading those slips at the table, seeing his handwriting on that note, had been the moment she finally couldn't unsee it either. She said she was sorry, and that she didn't expect it to fix anything. She was right not to, I wrote back. We're rebuilding, slowly, on new ground and new rules, the way you'd repair a house you love but wouldn't trust to hold weight yet. I let her come to one of the Saturday workshops. She sat in the back and watched me teach a room full of teenagers to keep what they earn, and afterward she couldn't speak, and I let the silence sit, and it was for once a kind one. My father sent an apology in the summer, through my Aunt Bev secondhand, the way he did everything he couldn't stand behind. He said he'd only ever done what he thought was best for the family. I didn't answer it, not out of cruelty, because an apology that still puts the family ahead of the daughter it emptied isn't an apology. It's the same drawer, closing again. I don't need to slam it. I just don't have to keep my paychecks in it anymore. Here's the picture I want to leave you with. It's a Saturday in the fall of 2025, a year almost to the day since I turned that laptop around. I'm sitting on the floor of my own living room, in the house I bought with money nobody could sign their name to, in front of the fireplace, on the hearthstone I chose. There's a fire going. There's a girl from my first workshop who texted me a photo that morning, her first paycheck, endorsed to no one, sitting in an account no one else could use. Her name, protected the way mine should have been. She wrote, I kept it. Just like you said, I kept it too. Everything they told me I owed, everything they said was the family's. everything a man held out his palm and waited for. I built it back myself, out of used textbooks and 41 betrayals and about 4,000 hours nobody asked about. And this time, my name is the only one with access. I survived them. I rebuilt myself out of what they threw away. And I no longer need a single person at that gray house on Peabody Street to tell me what I'm worth. If you've ever been the capable one, the quiet one, the one they decided could be emptied because you'd never make a scene, I hope you hear this. Your competence was never consent, and the people who mistook your silence for permission don't get to define your worth. You don't owe your success to the ones who tried to take it. If someone came to mind while you were listening, I'd love to know. What did you finally decide to keep? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, all the way to the end. It's the only thing I've ever really known how to do.